Begin the current Daf from Pesachim Daf Ayin Hey. Begin on the second line down at the top of the Yomid, where the Gemara continues explaining the halacha of our previous Mishnah, which opened up this paraketz at Tzeilen, how to go ahead and actually do the roasting of the Korban Pesach on Erev Pesach. Shiur is caused by the Kazakh and Chesed for anytime Daf Chaim. Appreciate you for joining us today's Daf. Some of this we're going to discuss in today's Daf are what type of grilling is considered sliyesh, which is a requirement when you go ahead and you cook the Korban Pesach, it has to be roasted by the fire. And there's roasting with residual heat, which is when you take out the fire from the oven and the oven's still hot. Is that considered sliyesh or not with regard to the Korban Pesach, which is the topic of our parak, or fueling an oven with oil shells, which are forbidden to have enough from, which generally, if you go ahead and cook bread with that shells, it's going to make the bread forbidden, according to one man the Amar. How about if you already shoveled out those shells and you just have residual heat? Would that be considered as if you're heating it with that isur hana? Additionally, in defining sliyesh, the Gemara explains that the death penalty of sreifa, which comes into our sugya regarding what's considered sreifa, is accomplished by pouring molten lead down the throat. In regard to why is that the definition of the Mises Bas Kohen. Then the Gemara discusses parts of the Korban Pesach that come in contact with other heat sources. That's the next Mishnah with Truma or Ma'aser Sheni, and what the halacha is. And one of the concepts we're going to see on today's daf, which actually starts off, which is Ma'aser Lister, that you have a seemingly contradictory story. Usually, if the Mishnah is bringing a story, it's supporting, and then our Gemara starts right now, the second line of the Yomid, asking that same exact question. The Mishnah said, "In Talmud the Pesach you're not supposed to roast the Korban Pesach on an iron spit, because, like we said, it's really cham ktsase, cham kula. You're really going to be roasting it by the metal and not by the fire. It has to be roasted specifically for the fire." And then the Mishnah brought a story, a ma'aser reveal, that said that Reb Tzaddik had said that Reb asked his servant to roast the Korban Pesach on the grill. So says the Gemara, Ma'aser Lister? You bring a story to contradict? You just told me you're not supposed to use a grill, or you're not supposed to use something metal because it's going to be roasting by the metal and not by the fire. And then you bring a story that Reb asks Tavi Avdai to go ahead and use a grill. So says the Gemara, that word's missing. This is what the Mishnah is supposed to say. What the Mishnah didn't say, and it's supposed to say, is Vim Askalam Keves, if we're talking about a grill that has large holes in it between the metal pieces, so that you could put the spit on the width, and you could go ahead and have the whole lamb hanging in the airspace between the two bars, that the meat is not touching any of the metal. Then it's mutter, then it's permitted again, because you're not touching any of the metal. That's what Rabbi Tzaddik says. Ma'aser Mu'il, Shamal Tavi Avdi, that he said to Tavi his slave, go ahead and roast for us the Korban Pesach. Ala askala minu keves. That word's missing from the Mishnah. On the grill that has large holes. Therefore, again, you're not running into the problem about that it's going to be roasted because of dava acham, because of that of the metal. Because not touching the metal, and that is going to be permitted. Now, relating to the halacha of the Mishnah, the Gemara says, we're going to bring back our Mishnah to relate to this halacha. So the Gemara introduces this teaching. Taner shesiki beklipa arla. It says regarding an oven that was heated with isuri hana, which is the shells of an arla. An arla fruit is forbidden to have benefit from it, and you use the shells which have the halacha like the tree itself. V'garfa. Now you shoveled out the fuel. You shoveled out those shells. And then you bake bread inside that oven, which again was fueled originally by the isur hana. So the question was, according to the one who says forbidden, which is brought in Parakulshal Lev the Beis Rebbe says the bread's going to be aser because the bread is getting benefit from the isur hana, and therefore it's forbidden. What's the halacha in this case? Over here, like Rashi's words are quote unquote, you don't have shvach eitz in the pas. You don't really have the benefit of the wood and the bread because you already shoveled out the wood. So this is what's called residual heat. The oven's hot from that isur hana, but it's not here anymore. So what would the halacha be with the bread? So Malay said to him, Rav the Rabbi responded, he says, pas mates, the bread's going to be permitted because you don't have any isur hana over here, so it's going to be permitted. However, Amalei said to him, but V'amr Rav Chin Nesaba, Amr Rav Asi, Amr Rav Yechanan, the Taner Shesiku V'garf. A similar type of a case. That of an oven which was heated up, and you shoveled it out, but Tzalabayis Pesach. Now, then you roast the Korban Pesach in that oven. Ein zet sliyesh. That is not going to be roasted by fire. Shenamar, because it says in Shemois, sliyesh, shtei pamim. It says 2 times to roast it by the fire. So it says 2 times, it's going to tell you that we're serious about this. What does that mean? It has to really be a fire. There's no fire over here. Yeah, of course the fire heat up the oven, but you shoveled out already all the fire, so it's not going to be considered as sliyesh. It's just from the oven, but not a fire. It has to be roasted by the fire. There's no fire over here. Now, but it says the Gemara, there's a lot of cheshbon in this daf, as we've had in many of these dafim. So again, it's one of those halting cup because of the steps. It's like the yuk inference that we ask from that. Time the Gali Rachman. Okay, it sounds like the reason is that the Torah is revealing to you. Sliyesh, they partner because the Torah says it 2 times. Okay, so therefore, you're telling me that when you shovel out the fire, so it's as if there's no fire over there. So it's not going to qualify as sliyesh. But halay gali rachmana. But if the Torah had not revealed us to this by saying the word sliyesh 2 times, how do you mean I would have said sliyeshu? It is roasted by the fire. So what that tells us is, by the case that was previously said, by heating by Yisur Hana, it should be forbidden. Because even when you shovel it out, there it doesn't have a miut by saying something 2 times. So you tell me that it's as if the fire is over there. Which, what's the fire? From the forbidden shells of the arla. It's like one of those questions of a diuk. You're telling me by the halacha of the Korban Pesach, it's not like the fire is there, so it's not going to be sliyesh, only because it said in the Torah 2 times. Okay, had it said not 2 times, 1 time, sliyesh, I would have said, yeah, it's gebruten by the fire. What fire? The fire's not there, it's gar fire. That would be considered, that's the fire, that's what heated it up. Oh, so wait a second, how are you telling me Yisrael that you shovel it out is going to be mutter because it's not here anymore? What do you mean? But the fire, this is the fire. I see the fire as if it's here. You see like sliyesh, it's considered the fire is here. It says also as if the fire is over here, so it should be usher. So, Amalei, and actually Tosfos this brings interesting from the Yerushalmi that says that, wait a second, every time you roast the Korban Pesach in an oven and you have coals in the bottom, the heat of the oven should also be cooking. It should also be tzlimach mazava'achar. And that Tosfos says, no, when there is an actual fire, the fire overpowers the strength of the oven, and the oven actually combines the heat of the coals that it shouldn't disperse, but it's going to be from the fire. But here, without it, we're saying that it says sliyesh 2 times, so that's going to be invalid. So why is it different than the halacha of Yisrael now? So the Gemara has 2 answers. Amalai, he says, you're right. But the Torah revealed to you this concept by the Korban Pesach, and you're right, you needed to say the word sliyesh 2 times to know it, but once we know it, so we learn that from there. To kalater kula to Yisrael, that once something is shoveled out already, it's like it's not there anymore. And therefore by Yisrael, it's going to be muteres. You're right, you wouldn't have known it from saying 1 time sliyesh, but now that we do know it, and that's why it's going to be muter. Or if you want to say the second approach, no, there's a discrepancy here between the 2 cases. Hasam over there by the Korban Pesach, time because of man sliyesh shtei pamim. Yeah, it's because the Torah said to you the word sliyesh 2 times, and that's how I knew to exclude if you already shoveled out the wood. You know why over there you have to say it 2 times? Because yeah, had you not said the word sliyesh, roasted by the fire 2 times, I would have said, because aish kabad rachmana. What's the term particular about? About fire. Now, the heat of an oven is considered a derivative of fire. If you put your garment on the oven wall, it's going to get burned. It's going to become ashes and fire. So therefore, I would have thought to say that even if you shoveled out the fire, namik sliyesh would still be considered, quote, roasted by the fire because the oven itself is considered sliyesh. That's why I had to say it over there 2 times. We don't care about the fire. It's the wood that's prohibited, that's arla that we're concerned about. It's not here, we shoveled it out already. That's why it's going to be mutter, and that's why it's different than the case of the Korban Pesach, and therefore it's not a contradiction that from over there that you see that it's like it is there, and here we're saying it's like it's not here, because there is, quote, the Eish is there. Here, the Eitzim is not here, and that's what's going to be permitted. Now the work is a related discussion. Someone cut the Korban Pesach. I didn't totally separate it. He cut it in 2-3 places so that it could quickly roast well, as people do with their Frankfurter. You cut it up in many different places. You don't separate it, but you cut it. Okay, and this is the main point that we're trying to bring out. And you put on top of coals. So Rabbi Yomi says, I said, that's considered roasting it by the fire. Meaning on the coals is like roasting by the fire. Generally roasting by the fire, you have it on a spit. and all you're getting is the heat of the fire. Here you have it on the coals itself, that's considered sliish. Okay. The Gemara has a huge discussion here. We're going through the Amid Beis over here on this halacha of Rebbe. Says the Gemara, Rami le Rav Achdavai bar Ami Rav Chizda. Mi Ami Rebbe, did Rebbe really say? And it's a lot of this cheshbon type, so hold on. Did Rebbe really say that kechalim, that coals, eish ninu, that it's fire? You tell me when you roast it put on the coals, it's considered roasting by the fire. But V'riminu seems to be contradicted from a brisa. The brisa there is quoting a pasuk of a Yikra, which is talking about the halacha of tzaras. The pasuk says if someone's going to have skin, and that on the skin is going to be a nichvas eish, a burn of fire. This is one of the types of tzaras that a person could have. That then you're going to have the halacha of what a nega is. I would only know if literally the guy got burned by fire. But nichva begachas, let's say he got burned by a coal, or beremetz, which is hot ashes, or besid reseach, or hot lime, or begifsis reseach, which gifts is another type, a type of lime that's hot, or anything that's a derivative from fire, which, as the Gemara explains, that's lasuyich kamik, or that's coming to include hot water. Minayin, how do you know that that's going to be qualified like the halacha of tzaras, of michvah, of a burn, and not for a different type of tzaras called shchin, which is the inflammation? They're very similar, but they're coming from different places. Now, what bothers Rashi and places are both, michvah and shchin have the same halacha regarding tumah anyway. What's the difference, which one it is? The nafkamina is, if you have a half of a bean size of a tzaras from a burn, and you have a half of a bean size of the tzaras that's coming from inflammation, not from fire, but from a different source, they don't combine, as the Gemara says in Chol Naf Chesem and Aleph, which that's the minimum shiur of a gris, the size of a bean. So if you have half of this, half of that, it's not going to combine. So it's relevant to know what the source is. But be that as it may, how do you know that these types of burns, even though it's not directly with fire, is also going to be considered as michvas ish? Tamalim, it says michvah, michvah rib. It says more than one time the word michvah. Why are you saying it two times? It's coming to include other types of burns, even from derivatives of fire. Oh, so says the Gemara, time of the Rabbi Rahmanon, and the fact that Torah needs a ribui, an inclusionary terminology of michvah to include the case of getting burnt by a coal. The inferences, again, there's a lot of these inferences, the yukim, from the what's between the lines. Now, if the Torah had not included the case of coals, from michvah, gachalim, lav, eishnenu, you see that coals is not fire, because when it says michvas eish, I'm not including coals. I need a ribur to include it. So that contradicts Rebbe. You see that coals is not sliesh, it's not fire. So how could you say that that's going to qualify as sliesh? So Amalei says, wait a second, that's not difficulty. Gachela shel eitz, the case that Rebbe's talking about, by wooden coals, lo yitzor kroler bui. That you don't need a pasuk because yes, that is eish, that's sliesh, that's fire. Ki yitzor kro, when did we need a pasuk over here by the halachas of tzeras? Is legachela shel mateches, a coal made out of metal. That is not the same as fire. Wood gets burnt up. You see wood, it's fire. You have a house made out of wood, boom, flames, whatever. Metal is very different to fire. And therefore, that would not be considered as fire itself. That would be a hot substance. But that's why we have to include that from nifra. Now the Gemara, however, asks on that. Is that really so that coals of metal is not considered fire? And that's how you're explaining that's why by tzaras you need a special ribui? So again, we're going off on the trail over here, we're dropping gummy drops as we're going, so just follow along where we're going, so you know how to get back. So we just gave an answer to differentiate between Gechalim Shal Mateches and Gechalim Shal Eitz, and now we're getting off on that. So we're saying that, hey, wait a second, is that really so? The answer you just gave me, that coals made of metal is not fire? But V'algali Bas Kayim, we're going to get into a different halacha here. By the daughter of a claim. The pasuk says by Yikra, which the pasuk says if there's going to be a daughter of a man who's a kohen, if she's going to have znus, her father she has desecrated. So halacha is she has a unique halacha different than all other Jewish women. Be'esh tisarv, she gets burned by fire, meaning her misa is that of sreifa in contrast to other women. Now, what do you mean in the fire she's burned? So Ma'avar Masni says what they do is psilo shel avar, a wick of lead, they would melt it and they would pour it into her mouth. That's that's what they would do for her. Now, what do you see is that, what does it say in the pasuk? Ba'esh tisarv. Eish. Wait a second, eish? And how are you killing her? By molten lead. Wait a second, didn't you just tell me that hot metal is not fire? So how is that be'esh tisarif? So that contradicts the answer we just gave before, that it's not considered fire. Says, no, Shani Hassan, there it's different. You're right, usually it's not considered as fire. But there's different because the Amakar, the Pasuk says, be'esh tisarif. In fire, she should be burnt. Well, the word tisarif sounds like all types of burning. Because why are you saying in fire she should be burned? Hey, if you're saying fire, there's obviously burning. We have enough logic to know that. Should have just said, B'eish, in fire. What are you adding on? She should be burned. The rabbis call all fires that are derivatives from fire, which is coming to include even that of metal. And that's why we're including it, because from the word tisar. So the Gemara says, wait a second. Okay, you answered that question, but the way you just said it sounds like v'koshkin eish atzmo, and for sure fire itself. I mean, you're telling me it really says be'eish in fire, and you're saying why do I have to say the word tisar? Oh, that's coming to include that of metal, even though metal is usually not considered eish, and therefore we need a special riba by michvah to tell you that that's going to include metal as fire. But it sounds like for sure fire itself is going to go ahead and be able to use to kill the bas kohen. If that's the case, so let's just surround her with the wooden branches and burn her, put her on a fire. This has been done many times throughout history. Just make a bonfire and put the person in and burn them. If you're saying that for sure should work, okay, that's the word beish. Says no. Asya streifa memnei Aaron. We have Gzeir Shavim. We have a limud from the sons of Aaron, which they were burnt by fire. Nadav Avihu, when they came to bring the foreign fire in front of Hashem, and the fact that a bas kohen has to be burnt. Malan, just like over this, Shreifas Neshama B'Guf and Kayim, as the Gemara says in Sanhedrin of Bezim and Aleph, they were like two threads of fire that went into their nostrils and killed them, so their soul was burnt, but their body was intact. Afkan also over here by the bas kohen, Shreifas Neshama B'Guf and Kayim, that the soul gets burnt, but the body is still around. So it can't be that we just put a bunch of firewood and they burn them in the fire, because the body has to stay intact. Says Gemara, why don't you make boiling hot water and pour that down her throat? You'll also have streifers and the shavim b'guf kaim. Why do you say that you pour specifically molten lead down her throat? Says no, you can't, because for a different reason. From Rav Nachman. Rav Nachman, he says, the says, famous passage, you should love your friend as yourself. Now that's not just about giving them a piece of cake. That's even borle misa yafa. It even applies when you have to kill the person because they did an aver that's chayv misa. You should still select an appropriate death, and don't do something that's slow and painful and torturous and disastrous, which hot water is going to be much more painful. Molten lead, it kills. Although it would seem like that it just totally liquidates everything that's inside, and boom, they die right away. That's a more mitziyafa. That's why we do it with pouring the molten lead. Now, so then the Gemara asks, wait a second. So you just told me two drashas, and the Gemara goes through that. So if you have this teaching of Rav Nachman, which we know it has to be molten lead because you got to do a misa yafa, they have to die instantaneously. So Gzeir Shava, so why do you need Gzeir Shava from the Bnei Aaron? Lamali, what do you need that for? You could know from here, of course, that you don't surround them with branches and make a bonfire because you got to be misa yafa. It's definitely got a misa yafa. So why do you need to learn now to exclude the bonfire from the Gzeir Shava if you already know it from the source of Nachman? Why we don't do even hot water and we only do hot lead? Somebody said, no, you need to have both teachings. Elav Gzeir Shava, you didn't have the Gzeir Shava from the sons of Aaron. Havamina, I would have said, no, it has to be literally fire, like to surround them with branches. Now, because Sreifas Neshama B'Guf Kayim loves Sreifi. If not for the Gzeir Shava from the sons of Aaron, we would never have thought to say that you could do such a thing of pouring molten lead down their throat, because just burning the soul but keeping the body is not considered burning, and the pasuk requires to do a burning. So therefore you needed the Gzeir Shava to tell you that yes, you see it's considered burning because it says that the sons of Aaron will burn, and the body was still intact. Now, Rav Nachman, and if you say, well, what are you going to do with Rav Nachman that says it has to be Misa Yafa? So how could you think to say that you tell me without the Gzeir Shava, you would say that it means you go ahead and take the branches and burn them, because you would have thought to say that doing it from inside is not considered valid? No, I would tell you, Nifish lechavili zmaris tuva. Yeah, you could do a Misa Yafa, even though when you're putting them into the bonfire. Put a lot of branches, make a big fire. That they die quickly. That's the word Ba'agola, most people don't know by Kaddish. Ba'agola was man Kaddish. Ba'agola means quickly. Hashem Mashiach should come quickly. Hashem should bring the Geula. So that it won't be a Misa Nevala. It'll be something, it'll be Misa Yafa because they're going to burn in seconds. So, Kamash Malan, that's why you need the Gzer Shabbat. They said no. Sreifas Neshama B'Guf Kayim is also considered a Sreifa. Since it's Sreifa, so now it's effective the teaching of Rav Nachman to select this type of a death of molten lead to exclude the branches in hot water, where although the branches is still somewhat of a Misa Yafa, it's not as Yafa as that of the molten lead, and we'd rather use that one because we have a Gzer Shabbat to tell you that Misas Neshama B'Guf Kayim is considered that of a Sreifa. But then the Gemara says, wait a second, okay, fine, you resolved why you need both those teachings. But why do you need the word Eish in the Torah? Since you're already coming to include all types of burnings, which even include that of molten lead, so what he's saying, Be'esh Tisarif, just say Tisarif. Because you tell me all types of straight for work, why say fire? Fire seems to be only fire. Says the Gemara, no, the reason why I need Be'esh Tisarif is Lafuke Avar Mi'ikari. You need to exclude if the lead was hot from its nature. Meaning that there's certain types of lead that when you take it out of the ground, it's already burning hot without a derivative being from the fire. That would come to tell you that that molten lead would not be valid to be used because it has to be for Eish Tisar. It could be old types of streifas that are derivatives from Eish, but it's got to be derivative from Eish and not from its natural state, and that's what the word Eish is going to tell us. Now, continuing on what we said before, the Gemara asks further questioning. Amali Rav Yirmiyah Razir says, is that really so? That wherever it says in the Torah the word Eish, and it says the word Sreifa together with it, like we said by Bas Kohen, by the daughter of a Kohen, is Larabis called Sreifa Sabois Matmas Eish, that's coming to include all burnings that are derivatives from fire, like we're saying by Bas Kohen, that you could burn her not only with that of a fire, but actually with that of molten lead. But Vagabi Parman the again, we're following the gumdrops over here, so don't get lost. We're getting off a little bit here on these answers. But by Parman Srafim, which are the bulls that get burnt, there's certain karbanis that the animal is burnt out of the machna. The Sibu, where it says regarding them in Vayikra, which if you say karbanis in the morning, you're always saying this Parman Srafim, Mestidim Srafim, Meshchitas Srafim, you say these types of bulls. It says in Vayikra, V'sadav Oisei al Eitzim Be'esh. So you burn it on wood in fire. Now, by the time you put in the Brisa, that Be'esh, when it says in fire, is V'loi B'sid Resech, now with hot line, V'loi B'giz Resech, now with giz also says temporal line. You can't burn it that way. Wait a second. Didn't you tell me wherever it says Sreifa with Eish, the word Sreifa, because you could have just said Eish, the word Sreifa is going to include all types of fires, meaning not only fire, but even derivatives of fire, which includes even hot lead or hot lime. So why are you saying that by the Parman Srafim, you can't, it has to be with fire itself, but there's the word Sreifa there also. So Malay, so on that, Reb Zeri, he answered, he said, no, Hachi Asher, can you compare the two Pesukim? Hasam over there by Bas Kohen, you have to get the order. Ksiv Be'esh, it first says the word in fire, V'ad Tisarf, and then it says to burn, so Be'esh Tisarf. So the word Tisarf is L'Rabas Kol Shreifas Abois Machmas Eish. The word Tisarf, which is unnecessary, which is said afterwards, why do you say that? Just stop before the word Tisarf. But it's going to include all Shreifas that are derivative of some fire, which includes even molten lead. But Hach over here by the Parman Srafim, Ksiv, what does it say? Get the order. V'saraf Oisei al Eitzim Be'esh. It says the word Sreifa first, which that sounds like all Sreifas. But then it says L'b'seif Eish. At the end it says fire, which sounds like only fire. Remember to tell you the Eish and only fire, and that's actually what the Pasuk is going to teach you, that no, only fire, and not all types of burning. That's why it doesn't work with hot lime over there. But then the Gemara says, wait a second. Hasam Nami, they're also by Parman Srafim, Ksiva Sreifa L'b'seif. It says the word burning after the word Eish also. Yeah, it says the word Sreifa before the word Eish, but it also says afterwards, like the Pasuk says over there in that same Pasuk, at the end, as it continues on the page, it says, Al Shefach HaDeshin, on the place where the ashes of other karbanos are poured, that's where you serve, that's where you should burn these param and the srafim. So you see it says the word Yisarf afterwards. So Yisarf should come to include all types of burnings, like you said by Bas Kohen. So why can't the param and the srafim be burnt with hot lime? Why does it have to be specifically with fire? So they said, good question, but no, Hahu Yisarf, that word Yisarf at the end of the Pasuk, you needed to teach something else. It's not coming to include all types of sreifas. Look at this, like learn the brisa. When it says yisarf at the end of the pasuk, you should burn it. It means alpha pesha and sham dashin. It means to say that even if there's no ashes over there. In other words, as Rashi explains, that you shouldn't say, oh, the Torah is particular that you have to burn these karbanis where there's actual ashes. On the place where people would take out the ashes of the mevecha, it's like it says in Yikavav, and if the ashes were taken away from there, then you can't burn them over there. No, that's the pasuk saying yisarif, which is mikol makom. You'll burn it there, whether it's there or not. It's just telling you where the place is. So to yisarif, it says you should burn it. It's alpha pisha hitzis or uberubah. That even if the flame has already taken a hold of the majority of that animal, you should stay engaged in it until it gets totally burned. That's what yisarif says. It has to be burnt. I mean, you've got to be busy with it until it's finally totally burnt. But it's not coming to tell you a riboy, and therefore that's why by permanent sofim, it has to be specific with fire, because it's after the first yisarif. And the second yisarif, that's after Eish, they come and tell you something else, that you should always be engaged in burning. Now, going back to Amid Aleph, the Gemara now comes back to a second explanation. We had asked a question on that of Rebbe, referring to the halacha of coals. Rebbe had said that if you roast the korban pesach on coals, it's also tzli eish. The Gemara says, what? You see, it's not tzli eish? So Ravina, he gives a different approach to answer the question on Rebbe. The Rebbe had said again, coals are tzli eish, but the question was, we said from the Brisa, that it says in this way, again, we're going back in the Gummi Graph, so we're going back to where we were, which was, the Brisa says you need nichva, a ribui, to include, if a person got burned by a coal, to say that's going to be considered as a michvas eish. So the question was that, wait, without the ribui, sounds like that coals are not considered as eish. So that contradicts Rebbe. So that says, Ravina says no. It's not difficult. The truth is that even metal coals, that it's going to be considered as fire. But the Brisa has a mistake. There's an error. And the case of the coals is not from the riboy of michvah, rather it's from the inference of the word fire itself, like Rebbe, that coals are fire itself. That's what sli'esh. And he says like this, he says, karth matan, you have to actually wrap and say together the case of the coals with the fire in the explanation. In other words, the comma is in the wrong place. Michvas eish, the Brisa is supposed to be read like this. When it says that if it's burned from a fire, the person's skin, and then he gets a neged tzaras. There's a comma over here that we originally read it as I would only know that it got burned by fire, period. How do we know that? So no, the comma, the period is supposed to be after the next word. I would only know it if it got burned by fire or with a coal, period. Gechelis is included in fire, like Rebbe. But if it got burnt by hot ashes, or besidr seif, or hot lime, or begivs seif, or this hot givsis, or anything that's derivative of fire, or which includes that of hot water, minayin, how would I know that? That's what mikvah is coming to include, but that's only coming to include the hot ashes and the lime and so on. But regarding that of the coal, it's not included. You don't need mikvah to be maber that, because that's actually included in mikvah seish, which like Rebbe, that is sli'esh. Okay, that was another answer for that. But now the Gemara continues asking on Rebbe. Rabbi posed the following contradiction. He says, did Rebbe really say that coals are considered as fire? So we continue to asking on this concept. But it seems to be contradicted from the following Brisa. Brisa says gachale. What's this gachale? So it's from a passing the Yikar Tezayin, which is talking about by the Kohen Gadol when he's doing the Avodah Yom Kippur. It says, he's going to take a pan full of gachle eish, of fiery coals, etc., which that's part of the main avodah on Yom Kippur, that he takes those coals into the Kodesh HaKodeshim and he puts the ketayos on and he makes this smoke. Now, the Brisa is going to say that had the pasuk only said gachle, coals, and it would not have said eish, so yochel emimus, you would think that we're talking about coals that are extinguished, that are going out. But not if it's fiery coals. Because fiery coals is not, quote, gachale, it's not coals, rather that would be fire. So tamaloymer eish. So that's why the pasuk has to tell you the word eish after the word gachale, to include fiery coals. Because if I didn't have the word eish, I would have thought to say that it's only if it's the coals that are basically extinguishing. That's if it would have said gachale without eish. So that's why I have to say eish to say no, even fiery coals. So too, let's say eish. Let's just only say the word fire, and I wouldn't say gachle. So yochel shal havis. you would think, okay, it's got to be a flame, not fiery coals. That means a flame, because coals, even if they're fiery, are not generally called eish. That's why it says the word gachale to include not only an actual flame, but also fiery coals. Which so as the Brisa just explains. So how so? When the Torah writes to you the two words gachale and eish, sounds like coals that have fire, which is maybe minalecha you bring it from the fiery coals. That's what the Brisa is telling us. Meaning, if it would have said gachale, I would have thought to say only like extinguishing coals. If it would have said eish, I would have thought only a flame. Gachale eish sounds like somewhere in the middle, a fiery coal, which is what we call leichashes. Okay. So the Gemara has a question on the Brisa, which from the explanation of the Brisa, after we answer this question, will then tell us what the question is on Rebbe, which says Gemara v'hagu v'kasha. But there seems to be a difficulty in how you're reading the Brisa itself. Because first, Amrit Gachale, first you say that if it would have just said coals, I would think that when they're only like extinguishing type of coals and not fiery, and so if so, from the fact that it would not be including loichashais, if it just said gachli, if it just said coals, it would not mean fiery coals. So obviously the inference is that fiery coals are not called gachol. So what would they be called? Obviously that you see, the loichashais, the fiery coals, eishninu is fire. Now, in a sefer, but look at the sefer. You then tell me eish, it would just say fire. Yochashaleb, as you would think it means a flame. So it says no coals, which therefore it's not talking about just a flame, it's got to have a coal over here. Now, so what do you see from there? You see even fiery coals is not fire, because he's saying from the word fire, I was it flame and not fiery coals. So which one is coals? Is coals? Is fiery coals or fire? Which one is it? It sounds like contradicting from the Brisa itself, that it's neither here nor there. You tell me that one inference is making it sound like it's fire, other inference is making it sound like it's not fire. On Vavam Rav Sheshes, he says, okay, Hachitan, you're right, this is how you have to read the Brisa. Gachale, if it would just said coals, Yochel, you would think, and this is where he's explaining differently, Bein Oimimais, Bein Lakashas, doesn't mean that we would have thought it's only Oimimais. From the word coals, I would have thought to say, yeah, any type of coals. When it's smoldering, when it's extinguishing, both are called coals. Tamalim Eish, that's what the Torah has to tell you the word Gachale Eish, the word fire after the word gachli to exclude the enemies to tell you no, if it's going out, that's not going to qualify for the Vayde Mikipur. It's got to be gachli, it's going to be fiery coals. Eish, if it said the word fire without coals, so yochel shal heves, you would think it means a flame, because you're right, as Rav Sheshes is explaining. The word fire itself doesn't mean even fiery coals. It means a fire. A fire is a flame. A fiery coal is still not a flame. Oh, that's why Tamalim gachli, that's what it says gachli eish. You have to write both. Okay, it said how so? Maybe did you bring from the fiery coals? Okay, so that's the explanation. Let's say after obviously read the Brisa, we have Sheshes interpreted. So yeah, gachle includes fiery coals. But again, I would have thought to say that you could choose either one or the other, any type of coals. Let's say gachle eish, no, it's gonna be fiery coals. Because if you said just fire or gachle, you wouldn't know the case we're talking about. From gachle, you would think any type of coals, which is not the case, can be emas. And from eish, you would have thought it has to be a flame, which is not the case. It's going to be gachla eish. Fine. Now this is where the Gemara concludes the question on Rebbe. But either way, what you see from here is gacholim lo yikri eish. You see that coals are not called fire. From the fact that you needed gachle to include even the fiery coals, obviously that if you would have just said eish itself, like we just explained for Rav Sheshes, does not include coals. So kashla Rabbi. So when Rabbi said that coals is sli eish, you see that coals are not. You see, that's only from gachale that you include the coals. But fire it's not, eish it's not. So the Gemara says, wait a second, the way Rav Sheshes interpreted, you're only asking the question, yes, definitely the Brisa is difficult how to read, you have to reinterpret it. But the way Rav Sheshes reinterpreted is not the correct reinterpretation. Amar Abaye says, this is the way you have to explain the Brisa. If it would have just said, again, there's a lot of this, so gachale, if it would have just said, coals, yochel, I must no, you're mistaken. For this it said coals, I would have understood it to mean extinguishing coals and not fiery coals, because fiery coals are not gachal, rather it's eish. Tamalema eish, that's what it says fire, to say that include the fiery coals. But the next line in the Brisa Don't say, as we had originally read, that if we would just say eish, I would think it means a flame and not coals. No, rather, eish, if we would have said fire, yachol, you would think ratza shall have a yavi. You would have thought the guy has a choice. If it would have just said fire, okay, there's many types of fire. If he wants to, he could bring a flame without coals. Ratza gachel yavi. If he wants, he could bring the fiery coals, because both are called eish. Tamalei magachli. That's why I have to say gachli. The gachli eish, fiery coals, to exclude if it's just a flame. Because a flame is not fiery coals, it's fire, but it's not fiery coals. Okay, so how is it supposed to be? It has to be specifically, maybe specifically from the fiery coals. Oh, but one thing you see is that coals are considered fire. And from eish you would have known it. You just would have thought you could just have a flame. And as we gachli to exclude that. But if I would have just said gachli, I would not have known coals that are fiery. I would have thought only coals that are extinguished. That I would have known from Gachli. So you see, like Rabbi. However, this interpretation is also rejected. Amar Rabba, or the Ger says Rabba, has a problem with Abaya's interpretation. He says, are you serious? You tell me that if it would have said fire, then Ratza, if the guy wanted Gacheles Yab, he could bring a coal. Ratza Shalebes Yab, if he wants, he could bring a flame. Shalebes, but like Gachel, and that's what you have to explain in the price, because it's got to tell me it's excluding something. Right? You're telling me that Shalheves Boigacheles, that if he wanted to, he could bring a flame without coals? What is a flame without coals? Could go in the Shafi, Lamon and Mishcha, sounds like the guys at the Chasnas, the guys in the middle, they take the spray and they put the hat on fire and they start juggling fiery hats, whatever they're doing. But how do you have a fire without coals? What you got to do is you got to smear the bowl with oil, the isli beinura, and then you light a fire. Why would I need a pasuk? You tell me that Gachli is coming to exclude from that case of Eish. Why would I need a pasuk to exclude from that? Hashda is now the name Melech Bas of Adam. In front of a regular flesh and blood, a human being, you would never do such a thing. If you want to bring coals, if you want to bring make a fire like you have to with incense, you bring something respectful of coals. But to light oil and just have a fire, that's not. It's not a distinguished act. So if name Melech Machem Lachem HaKadosh Baruch Hu isn't a Kal V'Chol, of course you're not going to do such a thing in front of the King of all kings, in front of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. So why do I need Gachle to exclude from that type of a fire? Just bring a flame? That's not that type of fire is not an appropriate type of a fire. So Elam Rabba gives a third interpretation. So he says Taratz Hach. He says no, amend the brisa like this. From that, you'll have an answer for Rebbe that you'll see that Gachalim, fiery Gachalim, Leichash as the call, is considered as Eish, and therefore it is Sliish for the Korban Pesach. Now, in this context, we're talking about Avodah Yom Kippurim. You have to read the brisa like this. Had it only said Gachle, Kols, Yochel Emas, you would think that only if they're extinguishing. But not if they're fire. Tamam Eish, that says the word fire, it can't be extinguishing, it's got to be fire. Now, Eish, and this is the point that Rav is fixing. Eish, had it said fire, Yochel, you would think, not like the way Abaya said that you could bring a flame without coals, because a flame without coals is not a respectful type of a fire. No, rather, what would you think that we have to exclude from? You would think Yavi Mechze Gacheles or Mechze Shaleves. Yeah, of course you're bringing, it has to be coals. But you would think half could be flame and half could be coals. For example, like a poker, which is that of like if you have those are the sticks that you use in flames. That if let's say the fire took a hold of the majority of that stick, which you take from the outer mizbeach, which maybe a coal and a flame are both called eish, and you would have thought okay, but you could bring if half of it is coals and half of it is a flame. And this is another secondary point. At the Eile Gavoy, once you get into the Kodesh HaKadosh, into inside, Havakuli Gechelis is all going to be a coal. Meaning, when you get from Mizbech HaChitzon to Lefnai V'Lefnim, it's all going to be coals already. Because Rash explains, bringing it in, we don't need a miut, because in front of a human being, you would never bring a stick with its flame, because it actually brings too much smoke. So we would know it has to be coals. The whole thing that we need a miut for is only when you're taking it from the Mizbech, how it has to be the coals as you're taking it. So, but at least once you're going to get there, it's going to be all coals. But I would have thought to say that when you're taking it, it could be half flame, half coals. It's not coals yet, it's still flame, half of it. Oh, and that's if I would have said the word Eish. As the Pasuk says, in Vayikra V'lokach Malay Hamach, that he takes a panful of Gachle Eish, of fiery coals, which is telling Mishas Lekicha Nahav Gechal. From when you take it, it should already be coals, and we're excluding the flame from Gachle Eish. But again, it's not like just the flame itself. Of course, you would never take just the flame itself. it's half flame, half coals, you would have thought, okay, that maybe would be appropriate. Gachle eish, the word gachle is telling you it can't be a flame, it's got to be old coals from the balakach when you're taking it ready from the mizbeach. Now, Agav, the Gemara says, the following question, which we had once in the previous sugya, is the word with an alpha or an ayin, this extinguishing coal. And then Rabbi Yisrael quotes the pasuk in Yecheskel, Arazim le'amamu, the cedars will not dim them. Began came in the garden of God, which their appearance will not diminish because it's the prettiest of all the trees, the cedar tree, which Rashi says, Tomat Chirim, the Kig of Tzur, which Rashi says, maybe Rashi had a different gear because this pasuk seems to be going on something else. But that one thing you see that's with an ayin, not with an alpha. Now we begin the next Mishnah, which we'll discuss at great length on the next Daf, which this is one of the more complicated sugyas in Hilchas Kashrus, in Yeridea, nice, very difficult simonim on this, and a lot of it is in this sugya over here. So we continue with the next Mishnah, Halacha of Tzli Eish, regarding that of has to be roasted by the fire and not by davar achar. If it gets heated by something else, it's a problem with, here we're talking about Korban Pesach, but these halachas are brought for all halachas of tarubis and basa b'chalav and so on and so forth. Says the Mishnah like this, Naga, if let's say the Korban Pesach touched, b'charsei sholtana, their ovens were made of earthenware, let's say the Pesach touched the hot earthenware oven. Halacha is yiklav, you have to peel away, this is what's called kedei klipa, there's a lot of these terminologies that I would learn, because it's tarubis, that we have these concepts over here. You have to peel away from the Korban Pesach es mekoimei, the place where it touched the oven. As the Gemara is going to explain, because that means that part of the animal got cooked from the heat of the oven and not from the heat of the fire. As we had mentioned before, it says sliyesh 2 times to exclude even an oven that you have residual heat that you had shoveled out, and the earthenware walls is considered like shoveled out from the heat of the fire because it has just the oven walls, and that's not from the tzli of the eish. So therefore, that's roasted from something else. So therefore you have to peel away that place. That's like, so to speak, not kosher because it wasn't roasted the right way. Another halacha is notaf. If it drips from the oven, if it drips in the oven, from the juice, you have a juicy animal dripping, al hacheres, on the earthenware oven, and it bounces back where it got heated up, the fat of the animal got heated up from the earthenware wall, and it bounces back now, and it gets absorbed in the animal because there's a splash back. Oh, yiteles mekayma. Here, it's not even enough to do just what's called kedei klipa, just to peel away. You have to take away a thicker part of the animal. The reason is because the shuman, the fat, gets absorbed much more than just by touching a hot earthenware wall, and that fat, which had dripped from the animal, and then got heated from the walls of the oven, which then bounced back. So now you have to do what's called netilas makom. You have to do even more than just peeling away, because that's a thicker piece because of the gravy that's more juicy, that gets more into the animal. Not to miroit ve'alaselos. Let's say it drips from its juice, from its gravy on flour, which I was going to explain. We're talking about hot flour, which that means that the gravy is going to be heated from the heat of the flour, so that's being roasted because of something else. So you're not allowed to eat that gravy that's in the flour because, again, al toichlu kim tzliyesh. You have to eat the Korban Pesach, which includes its gravy, only if it's roasted by the fire, and it's being roasted by the flour. So therefore, yikmitzes mekaymei, you have to take a fistful from the place of the flour, and you burn that fistful like all other kachim that became possible because they were talking about one of the menachos. Now it says the Mishnah, let's say sachay b'shem and truma. Let's say, these are other as related to the Korban Pesach. Let's say you smear the Korban Pesach with truma oil. So it depends. Im chabur is kahanim, if that chabura of the people eating the Korban Pesach are kahanim, so yeah, they could eat it because they're kahanim, they could eat truma. Im shal Yisrael, if they're non-kahanim, and now you smeared it with truma oil, which they cannot eat, im chayhu, so if the carbon was raw, so you have the chenom, so you wash it off because it didn't absorb anything. Vim tzlihu, but if it was roasted, which now it's absorbable, so yiklav esachitza, what you have to do is you have to peel away the outer part of the animal because it absorbed that of a peel's worth of the truma oil on the surface of the animal. Now let's say sachay b'shemen shel ma'aser sheni. Let's say you smeared the carbon with the oil of ma'aser sheni, which is your produce that the second tithe you take up and you eat in Yerushalayim, which everyone's allowed to eat it. But what the Mishnah says is, Lo yasenu dama al b'nei chabur. You come and say, hey, Chavra, we all chipped in with this Korban Pesach. I brought my whole that I have for the year, my oil. I used it on the Korban Pesach. Guys, pay me back. I got to be the one always shelling out. I went and smeared this oil now on the animal. So it says the Mishnah, Lo yasenu dama al b'nei chabur. He cannot charge the chabura monies for his Meiser Sheni oil, because she'ein paidin Meiser Sheni b'Yushalayim. You can't redeem Meiser Sheni in Yerushalayim, which is what you're trying to do, by having them pay you back, because even to eat it there in the state of sanctity, the pasuk says, Ki yidu b'mimcha haderech v'nesata kesem. The only way you're allowed to deconsecrate your Meiser Sheni is if you're far away from Yerushalayim. You want to be able to make it easier to travel then. You don't want to schlep all your stuff, so you can change it into monies and then use those monies to buy stuff in Yerushalayim. But once you're in Yerushalayim, you can't be paid it. So therefore, you can't go ahead and now start getting money for your Meiser Sheni, and therefore, although you went out, you wouldn't be able to get compensated from the Bnei Chabura for your Meiser Sheni oil. Something to discuss in today's Daf Psachim, that's Ayin Hey. We said that you cannot roast on a grill, but as we had explained, but if it's menukeves, if there's large holes, then you're going to be able to have the spit on the grill without touching the metal pieces, and therefore then it's a valid way. And that was the short term meal that he told Tavi Abdi to go ahead and roast it because it was large holes. Then we got into discussion regarding an oven that was heated with the shells of an arla fruit, but you shoveled out those shells, and then you bake the bread. According to the one who says that generally the bread becomes forbidden because it's heated with a Isra Hana of arla. So the answer was that the bread's going to be permitted. Why? Because you don't have the shvach of the eitzim in the past, because you already shoveled out the wood. But the Gemara asks, wait a second. By Korban Pesach, we say it's not considered sli eish, roasted by the fire, only because it says 2 times in the Torah sli eish. But if it would have said only 1 time, then even when you shoveled it out, what's called residual heat, it would be considered roasted by the fire. But wait a second, didn't you tell me once you shovel it out, the fire's not there? And that's why by the Klipa Arla is going to be permitted? So we're going to have 2 approaches. Either, the Torah taught us by Pesach, and that's what we know from there, that once you shovel it out, it's like it's not there. There, it was the first place, you have to say it twice. But that's what we learned from there. Or, no, there it's different, because there would have thought to say, what the Torah is particular about is Eish. Even if you shovel it out, it's still fire. Kindle, don't touch, it's fire. No fire, look, there's no flame. It's hot metal. It's fire. But over here, the particular is regarding the it's etz and isra hana. The once it's shoveled out, it's not there anymore. I don't care that's fire from it. The isra hana is not there, never it's going to be permitted. That was a difference between the case of Pesach and then of the isra hana. Then we spoke about teaching from Rebbe that if you cut up the Korban Pesach and you put on coals, then he says that's going to be valid for the Korban Pesach. Although the Torah said sliyesh, that's considered as sliyesh. Wait a second. The Torah only tells you that from a ribui of michvah regarding what's considered sarasa michvah's eish is because it says 2 times the word michvah. That's how I know to include that of gachelis of a coal. Had the Torah not included it, it would not have been fire. Wait a second, didn't you tell me gachelis is fire and that's considered sli eish? Why do you need a special ribui? So 2 approaches the Gemara has. Either the ribui of gach is coming to tell you gachel shel matachas. You're right, gachel shel eitz. It is like fire, like Rebbe says. That teaching regarding the tzaras is specifically a metal coal. And then on Amud Beis we had a different answer. The Gemara says, no, you're reading the brisa wrong. The period's supposed to be after gachelis. Fire and gachelis I would have known from michvas eish, but all these other cases like with hot lime and with hot ashes, all those I would not have known, and that's what you need to read before. That was the second approach. But first, the Gemara went through the first approach and said, wait a second, you're telling me that metal coals are not considered as fire, and that's why you need a ribui? What are you talking about? The Torah says that but the Bas Kohen there was mezana, that you give her the punishment of sreifa, and you know what it is? You pour molten lead down her throat. But didn't you just tell me that's not eish? So how could you say that that's yisrafu be'esh? Says the Gemara, no, because it says be'esh tisarif. The word tisarif is extra. What if it says be'esh tisarif? Just say be'esh. I know you get burnt with fire. We know that, right? Why is it tisarif? I'll tell you all types of streifa. Now, in contrast, by Parman the Srafim, although there it also says eish and streifa, but it says the word eish at the end to tell you that no, it's specifically fire over there, and that you cannot burn the Parman Srafim in some other ways. It says the word streifa there at the end. So that's to tell you, even if there's no ashes over there, even if it's mostly burnt, you have to burn it all the way. But that's why Parman Srafim is different. But then the question was, wait a second. If Be'esh Tisarif is the source that you tell me that Sreif is Baskoin, and Tisarif is including molten lead from the extra Tisarif, but then for sure you should be able to burn them by the fire. So why didn't you just make a big bonfire and burn the Baskoin? So we have two sources which the Gemara had to tell us what you need from both the sources, but one's from the Aaron, that we say that no, even Gufay Kayim is considered as Sreifa, and V'Avdresh Kumaycha tells you from Rav Nachman that Misa Yafa that it's not an appropriate death to burn them in the bonfire, the Otu Dafei, and just make a big bonfire. We don't do that, and that's how we know that it's molten lead, even though it says Be'esh in the pasuk itself. But Tisarif includes molten lead, and then we're going to choose that one because V'Avdresh Kumaycha tells us to do the more Misa Yafa. Then we had another question. He says, wait a second. You're telling me coals are called fire, and that's why it's going to be valid as sleek eish, roasting by the fire? But we have a different halacha by the Yomei Kippurim. It says gachle eish, which it's a whole discussion in the Gemara, the Brisa. But the two terminologies of gachle and eish tells us it's something in the middle, burning coals, a loichashay. It has to be fiery coals, which that tells us not oimemais and not a shalabas. But one thing from the Gemara's discussion, from the Shakatai of the Brisa, you see that coals are not called fire. At least that's the way Rav Sheshet explained it. And therefore we thought, okay, so wait a second. So you see, not like Rebbe. So he said, no, it's not true. The Havamina is, when the Bryce is saying, Yochel, you would think that, this is the final interpretation, that of Rabba or Rava, that we would have thought that you could take from the coals on Yom Kippurim, if they're half coals and half as a fiery flame. And then once it gets it, it's already coals, which of course, and it says, no, v'lakach, gachle eish. Gachle eish tells you it has to be from the Shas L'kichan of Gacham, but we never thought that Gacham is not eish. We knew Gacham is eish, but we either thought that you could take either a flame like a bicep or half flame and half coal, and that's what Gachle eish comes to exclude. But again, it's not a typical on Rebbe. It is like Rebbe, that Gachalim, that Leichashays are considered Sli eish. Then we started the next Mishnah, which starts all these halachas of Yeridea, that regarding the carbon, as it applies to the carbon Pesach. If the carbon Pesach touched the earthenware part of the oven, so halacha is that yikleif is mekayma. You have to do what's called kedei kliba. You have to peel away because it's not sliach. It's getting burnt by the oven walls. And that's where it's getting roasted from, and it has to be roasted only from the fire. We said if let's say drips from the gravy on the earthenware, and then it bounces back. The gravy bounces back onto the carbon pesach. You have to do even more than a kliba. You have to do what's called the netilas makom. You have to do a thicker part because the gravy is something that gets absorbed more. You got to take a large chunk of the animal. Then we said that if it drips from the gravy of the carbon pesach on the soilus of a mincha in the base of Mikdash, you have to take off a fistful and burn that because that juice of the carbon pesach is getting roasted by something else, which is the hot flour, and that carbon pesach is puzzle, and that's making that whole area problematic. You got to burn that. And then we said if you, let's say, smear the carbon pesach with oil of truma, say if it's a chavur kan, you can eat it. If it's elam, what do? They can't eat it. If it's raw, then you wash it off. If it's roasted, then it's permeable. Then you have to peel away the outer layer, which was smeared with that truma oil. That's what smeared with the oil of Maisa Sheni. Then we said you cannot make it monies to get from the Bnei Chabur because you can't do pidyon of Maisa Sheni in Yerushalayim, which is where it is when they're eating the carbon pesach. Thank you to any time for hosting us.